I look forward for today's topic, which to me, I believe has been a topic that has been coming up in my life a lot personally. A lot of people have been asking me about healthy relationships and maintaining it, not only at an intimate level, but also with family, with friends, with God, with the universe, with so many different types of relationships. So I am really thrilled to dive deep into this. But if you can please introduce yourselves to everybody and give us a little bit on why you chose psychology, because you two are sisters and you're sisters in psychology.
Yes.
Yeah, you can go first, Michal.
Well, I was initially pursuing medical school, and I was leading all the support groups. I started a peer support group. Basically, everything I was doing was psychology related, and I was very passionate about that. And to make a long story short, Maayan was getting ready to decide, what comes next after college. And she was like, oh, maybe I'll, check out therapy. Therapy school is what I call it. And I was like, wouldn't it be fun if we went together to do our MFT? We're at separate schools. But yeah, it's something, at least for me, it comes very natural. I feel like I was like primed for it.
Yeah.
And I love it.
Yeah, we both actually went to UC Santa Cruz, so I kind of followed in my older sister's footsteps a lot, but I also gravitated towards similar things, like Santa Cruz is in a redwood forest, and I just found like healing powers in nature, and I found power in just human connection, and one thing led to the other. I worked in real estate, which is such a people's business, and then I'm like, I'm listening to all these people's problems, and
Yeah.
not going anywhere, and I wanted to make a bigger impact. So that's what I applied to my program on a whim. I'm like, I just want to like get my master's in this field, and we are both passionate in psychology. We've been talking about like psychology things throughout my whole life. Like we just always got to conversations, and that's how we came to this field together.
I love it. I love it. And for those of you who are new to the community or just tuning in from the audience of Sisters in Psychology, I do want to say that I also have a background in psychology. I graduated from UC Irvine, so I definitely I wear gold and blue as well. And I chose psychology actually as an elective because I was also going into the biological studies, but I was undecided and undeclared with what I wanted to do with that. I wanted to go towards optometry. And then I started taking women's studies courses as an elective, psychology as an elective, and the concepts there made so much sense. I felt like internally I knew what they were talking about. I just didn't know what the theory or the technical term, scientific term to that concept was. And it all just made sense and it all clicked. And I tell people that although I went in for a different major, psychology literally saved my life, because when I was pursuing my degree, that's when I had some of the darkest moments in my development within being in my 20s, because now I'm 31, going to be 32, and I've noticed that in my 20s, from my early 20s all the way to like being 25, after 25 I had this like quarter life crisis. But thank psychology and thank you to all the founding fathers and mothers and of this science, I'm able to now dissect and not like always diagnose myself, but at least be able to go down to the root cause of what's going on subconsciously, what is going on internally, from social aspects, from cognitive aspects. And it's just so amazing to be able to geek out on all of this, because I do believe that now people are starting to see the importance of this science, because for a long time psychology wasn't really recognized as a credible science. It was kind of like quackery for a bit, but now we're starting to see, with so many people being personal development enthusiasts, that now there's a huge science behind it, which is psychology. So I'm really thrilled to actually be able to have these conversations, because I talk a lot about law of attraction, manifestation, and I talk about like positivity, but I don't really go really deep down into like psychological aspects, but I know that you ladies have actually advanced your studies and this is something that you're passionate about. So what would you say are some of the biggest components to actually cultivating healthy relationships with yourself first?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to go?
I guess what really helped me is therapy, journaling, and just like moving my body, getting out there, traveling, and just being in nature. My therapist, I actually struggled with finding a good therapist because sometimes you don't find a good therapist right away.
Yes.
And once I did, I understood why I am the way I am. And before that, I would journal all the time. I kept a journal since I was so young, and I don't write every day, but every like few months I would be like update and bullet point the updates, or I would write like wish lists, or like these are the people, make a list of these are the people in my life right now. And I journaled in all these like ways that helped me understand myself, and that's like one of the first key things of how to build a relationship with yourself.
Yeah, exactly. For me, it also going to therapy really helped, but I've always been in touch with my soul, I like to say. I've always been, I mean, I play piano, I write songs, and I have a songbook from when I was like 8, 9 years old, writing about like the beauty of life.
Wow, so profound.
Yeah, I so deep. I was like a little love bug child, and so I was always kind of like observing human behaviors and curious about connection. And and then in therapy helped me increase self-awareness, first and foremost. But a big part of that is identifying what emotions are coming up for me in terms of what I'm needing. So if I'm frustrated or irritable, like what am I needing in that moment? And is there a way to communicate it to myself without necessarily like expressing my need in an unhealthy behavior? Which
Yeah.
it's easy to say, but it's harder to actually apply. But the more you learn about it, the more you learn about this kind of stuff, the easier it is to apply it. But it's also I feel more motivated to apply it because I'm holding myself accountable to a higher degree now.
Yeah, so many snaps for that, ladies. I love that. With that, I want to add that sometimes I think now it's being more normalized to go and seek for help at a professional level with a therapist and a counselor, because I know that even a decade ago, a few decades ago, that was, you were kind of in order to see a shrink, right? As people have said, you would have to be extremely crazy or feel like completely out of control in order to finally see somebody. But now people are starting to normalize and kind of feeling even much confident, much comfortable actually seeing a therapist, seeking a counselor or a coach, um, because we are starting to realize that we can take preventive measures so we don't get to that point where we completely feel out of control. And I do love the fact that now people are taking initiative. I myself, even when I was studying psychology, I noticed that I needed a therapist to talk things out, to at least give me that little push, that insider scoop from someone that didn't have a biased opinion, because it's so easy to try to seek help with your family members, with your friends that you've been having, but likely there's a bias, right? Because they've been knowing you for a while, they identify with you a certain way. In the moment that you don't fit that identification anymore of what they have in their mind, then something's a little off. You've changed out of nowhere, right? And I do know that change is necessary in us to actually be able to ascend and to in psychological terms, we say to self-actualize, right? To finally get to that point where we are self-actualizing and feeling fulfilled with our life and how it has been progressing. So I do want to say that I myself have gone to therapy as well, and it has been amazing, not because of the awareness that I had, but because I had an a unbiased opinion from somebody and some insight that wasn't emotionally attached to me and how I felt.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. And it's really helpful to have somebody with like years of psychoeducation experience in that, and the psychoeducation especially, um, to help, and who is unbiased, like you kind of mentioned, and just helping you reflect. It's kind of like a one-way relationship with yourself. It's just somebody
Yes.
to reflect on what you're saying and help you reframe your mindset. Because think about like medicine is manipulation. So in regards to talk there, like in medicine you manipulate chemicals, and
Right.
that can help your body chemistry. And then with talk therapy, that also is manipulating in a way where you're manipulating the way you're thinking, and it's like an art. It's kind of like, lawyers also have this profession where you are reframing, and it's the art of reframe, the art of speaking concisely, the art of understanding yourself better. So
Right.
Yes.
And I think just on that point, besides the tools that a therapist provides, they're also a container. So there's someone, it's a space where the emotions that feel heavy for you are okay in that space. They're not going to be too heavy for someone who's trained to deal with heavy emotions. And on that note, I think the psychoeducation piece is so important, because through education is how we change, really. So.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Now, what would you say now that we covered the self, right? And we agreed that even going into therapy is a really great modality. Journaling is a great modality. Raising your awareness is a great modality. What would you say is how can we cultivate a relationship now outside of ourselves with others? Let's say with our peers.
Well, I think so. The first piece is identifying your own emotions. And I think once you identify your own, you're able to kind of be in tune with other people. And you're also equipped with a language to communicate with them, like kind of checking in with them, or kind of saying like, hey, what are you needing right now? How can I best support you? And so it really becomes about learning a language and learning a new way to relate to others. And so it's not just like, okay, I understand the behavior. It's also, how do I communicate that I'm understanding you? What's a good way to reach you through use of language?
Yes, I agree with that.
mm-hmm.
Is there anything that you would like to add, Maayan?
Oh, I also wanted to say that like something that I learned, this was through my psychoeducation. I learned that sometimes like when you understand how people are based on like their contextual background, how they grew up, you kind of learn to cut people more slack. And with that awareness, you're able to let people be where they are and not take it personally, not take offense. And I think that is what helped me form healthier relationships with peers, by not taking like each like behavior as like, oh, what do they have against me? Like, I'm just like, okay, let people be where they're at, like I'm okay, like kind of just differentiate yourself between you and the peer, and know that they are a product of their upbringing, their surroundings, their environment.
Yeah, a big part of relating with others is exactly being in touch with yourself, and knowing that okay, I want to come from ego, so I'm not going to take that personally. It's kind of knowing where you're from, and if your intentions are love based, you're going to be good. You're going to know to just give yourself the love that maybe someone can in that moment. And just like therapists, we're told, meet your client where they're at. So I would extend that into relationships, meet people where they're at, like Maayan said, and it's more about acceptance. I think the more acceptance we have for ourselves, the more compassion we have for ourselves, the easier it is to offer that to others.
I love that. I love that you both said all of this. You mentioned language, right? It's a whole with cultivating a healthy relationship. It is about actually being able to exchange or cultivate a whole new way of communicating through a whole new language, something that's more empowering, something that's maybe a little bit more assertive rather than passive or aggressive. Um, it also, as Maayan, you mentioned, oh my goodness, it was so good. I'm like, had it right here. You mentioned about realizing where they come from, right? I mean, culturally speaking, at cultural level, we're all raised differently, but even within a cultural level, we can take even socioeconomic levels, right? And we can really dissect and kind of categorize people in different compartments. Not that I want to do that, but if we were just to look at it from that type of perspective, that my upbringing, although we grew up in Southern California, or that we have a psychological type of educational background, it doesn't mean that we always will see eye to eye with certain things. And I do believe that respect is definitely one of those. It's kind of like, I don't want to say it's a mediator, but respecting someone else's background, someone else's education, someone else's perspective definitely will feel much better, and it will kind of, I don't know the words for it, but you were talking about not taking things personal, right? So when you have that respect level and you see and meet someone at their level without putting your so much emotion into it, then it's so much easier to be able to have compassion for people and have empathy for people, and even be able to forgive them or to bless them or whatever it is that need in that moment, or just hold space, not say a darn thing, and just hold space and energy for people so they can just evolve and continuously grow, because we are all in our own timeline. And the moment that we realize that, we either like take off a weight from ourselves, because there's some of us that feel responsible for other people to like elevate them. And I know that especially when you're in service, whether you're a therapist, right, whether you have clients, or whether you're a coach, or you're just in the service-based type of industry, sometimes you feel so much like pressure to elevate others. But the moment that you just kind of take a step back and you're like, hey, I'm in my timeline, they're in their timeline, then the weight just kind of drops and there's less conflict between people.
Exactly. I just want to add to that. I think the way people have conflict, that's learned, right? So if we
Yeah.
don't learn how to fight or how to have conflict in a healthy way, we need to reteach ourselves. We need to learn a new way so that because conflict is going to arise.
What would you say is the best way to cultivate a healthier relationship with the people that we've been spending a lot of time with, whether it's family, significant others, roommate? Because I know that during this time, since some of us haven't been spending a lot of time with those people, you know, we're starting to find little quirks that maybe irk us a little bit, or things that we're taking personal from what they're saying or what they're not doing, or how they're reacting. What would you say would be the best way to deal with the people that you spend even more time with?
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting just because with people that you love, it's like you're almost like tied to them, where you need to almost check yourself, whether it's excusing yourself, being like, okay, I need some space, I need to take a walk right now, getting space. um you did something about the idea of compassion, and it reminded me that from what I learned from compassion practices, the whole notion of compassion is to know that you and the other are suffering. And what does
Mm.
that look like? And I always think about that because it helps, and that also ties into the cut slack. So I think that it's so common to be irked, and what is a deal breaker and what is just annoying. Like, annoyance is part of relationships. Sometimes you do need space from people who do annoy you, and it's day.
Yeah, but so it just becomes a different conversation. It's like, I'm annoyed, I love you, but I need space, you know? Like, it doesn't have to be an unhealthy interaction, or at least I should say an interaction where feelings get hurt.
Yes.
It can really just be like, listen, I love you, but I need space. Like, I'm not, you know, it's recognizing within yourself what you're needing. I would say that's key in a moment like this. And the other thing I wanted to add is to create new happy memories together. So have some kind of bonding activities, play a fun game together, go on a walk together, listen to music, or make a quarantine playlist together, you know, something that kind of bonds you, so that you have more happier moments and more, you know, moments of connection rather than moments of disconnection, because the disconnection is going to come, the ruptures in the connection are going to come.
I totally agree with you two ladies, because even within myself, I feel like personally, because I live in the mountains in Big Bear, I feel like I've been quarantined for a while, and then even with my boyfriend, I've been having where I still feel annoyed, and we're just gonna allow the sisters to come back on. But I've noticed, if some of you resonate with this, please let me know. Comment if you have been getting more annoyed by certain family members, or if you've been getting more annoyed by the people that you've been interacting with a little bit more, because I know for sure that I have, and it's all about how you react to it that will actually make it a better, more fulfilling relationship or not. You know, that's what's going to really make or break people, how we react to the circumstance. Sometimes it's not what the circumstance is or the situation or what the ego wants to battle, because I do believe when arguments really like pop off, it's just the ego wanting to be heard, wanting to, you know, prove its point. And at one point, someone in that interaction is going to have to say, like, hey, I have to excuse myself for A, my sanity, and B, in order for us not to make this a make it or break it type of situation.
Yeah, and I think that being the person in a relationship who's the initiator of that conversation, I think it's okay. It's okay to initiate a conversation like that, because you're leading by example at that point, and then it kind of sets a new stage of how to interact. So
Yeah. Definitely, definitely. Now that we've touched on the self, on how to have cultivate healthier relations with yourself, with others, like peers, and now with even people that we spend more time with, like our roommates, our family, our significant others, what would you say right now is one of like the points that you want to point out to people that you've been noticing, maybe a trend during quarantine that people have approached you, whether it's your clients, whether it's just observations that you have made on your own? What have been those things, and how can we solve that?
It's a good question.
yeah.
Something I'm noticing a lot with my clients is just the idea of there's silver linings, of course, so I'll mention both. But one of the things that are coming out of this is grief, and grief isn't linear. There is it starts with denial, and then it goes to anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, and it's like a big roller coaster. Mm-hmm. So I'm noticing that, and it's kind of like sometimes my clients are feeling okay. I work with a lot of children, and so my clients, the parents of the children, are just like, I can't. This is too much. I'm in this house a lot, but the silver lining is that attachment is really strengthening for those families that are with their kids a lot. Obviously, I'm not talking about the sad story circumstances. I know domestic abuse is rising, and all of those things. A lot of mental health problems are rising. Substance abuse. So yes. It's a lot to conceptualize. in solving those, like there's so many problems that occur because we're so unique and we're all going through different experiences. At the most basic level, it's understanding yourself and, you know, finding the connections that are serving you and learning boundaries. That's a big one during quarantine since everyone's dealing with this in such a different way.
What would you
Yeah.
with that? What would you say is the healthiest way to draw a boundary? Because I know that it can literally be explosive or aggressive, or it can be you asserting yourself. What would you say is the best way to actually draw a boundary?
Something like, I love you and I need to go sleep. Like, I need to do this for myself so I can be better for you. Mm-hmm. I need to be for me so I can be good for you. Mm-hmm. But yeah, and a lot of times boundaries are key indicators in relationships because the people that respect your boundaries are the people that somehow stick. And the people that don't respect your boundaries, that's when growing apart happens.
Right.
Yeah. And underlying that, the healthy boundaries, it's about respect, and, you know, which you had touched upon too. And I think that sometimes when you're really close to someone, it can be easier to not have that respect. But you know, to answer your question, boundaries comes up also with clients, right? Like, mm-hmm. And so I think it's a good teaching opportunity for self and for others, and it's a good way to model that behavior for their own relationships. And I think that a lot of learning can take place in the therapy room on how to set boundaries, with the therapist or the therapist with the client, but mostly how to set boundaries with the people in your life. And a lot of that is, you know, exactly like what Maayan said, is just saying, like, I love you. I need to do this for myself so that we can have a good relationship. I need to fill myself up so that I have more to give right now. Just kind of, you know, there's a way to communicate, hey, I need to take space and I'm going to take it. So respect it. But it's going to be better for both of us in the end.
Right. So, now, what happens? Let's take this scenario a step further, because just as we mentioned, there's more rise in substance abuse, more rise in domestic violence, in just all types of abuse. What would you say is the best way to, if the situation escalates and the person doesn't respect the boundaries, charges you, comes at you screaming, and ego just shows up, what would you say is the next layer or the next step to take in order for you to still honor yourself and still assert yourself with drawing the boundary? What does someone do next that is still in
leave the room, leave the environment, go somewhere you can feel safe? I mean, if, like you said, if a person's charging at you and not respecting what you're needing, it's no longer safe, emotionally, physically. So that's number one that came to my mind, is make sure you're safe, go get safe. Yeah. And then it's like, okay, you know, kind of, it's almost like you have to force a cool off period. And, yeah.
Which are so important. And I want to say with that is that sometimes, even though we want to, because I've noticed this even with myself, even though I have all this knowledge, you know, we're still human and things happen. Right. But I've noticed that even when I excuse myself and my partner comes at me verbally, right, telling me like, there you go, off, fleeing again, there you want to do that, you know, my ego sometimes wants to defend myself. So I feel like in that moment, you have the option of honoring yourself and still minding your own business and moving forward with just leaving, or the ego wants to finally say, okay, this is round 2, let's fight, you know?
Right. Yeah, no, I definitely relate to that. I think that I mean, I don't know, what do you, I have a lot to say on this subject, but I want to hear what Maayan has to say.
Sure.
I know, I mean, I don't want to lose your thought.
I won't.
I mean, no, that's a very good point. I think that sometimes, like, it's hard to break pattern cycles. A lot of times, you learn that in emotionally focused therapy, that these patterns of pursuer withdrawer, it's a cycle that you need to learn how to break. and it takes two people to learn how to break. It's not just like one person, and sometimes you don't even, sometimes it's almost like, I think they call it trauma bond, or
trauma bonding.
Yeah. There's some relationships, and those are the ones that I call toxic relationships in my own terms. You know, that's when I tell people like, hey, if you're noticing this a lot and it's kind of like a one-way street, I take that as a red flag. You know, you have one of two options. Either you stay and you continuously exert your energy hoping that they change, and you know, you like sometimes suppress what you want in order for the other person to be happier, or to not like rock the boat a little bit, or you just you value yourself and your self-worth, and you honor yourself, and you're like, hey, I'm about to leave this relationship, and I'm determined to work on myself, to heal from within, to look at my own flaws, to and actually modify them, reframe, or elevate, or become more aware, whatever it is that you have to do. So definitely trauma bonding does exist.
Yeah, and the thing is, when we're in those situations, we're in our amygdala, so we're in the emotional brain. We're not thinking logically. We're not like, where is this intention coming from? You know, like that's the work you do when you're calm.
Yes.
But you know, there are techniques that can help. I personally like meditation because it helps decrease the connection between your amygdala, so the emotional brain, and the fight or flight response comes from there. And it helps. So meditation helps decrease the connections between your amygdala and your prefrontal cortex, which is your rational mind, the judgment, decision making. And when it's almost like you need that 1 second, really, that 1 second pause when you're so triggered and fired up, to be like, yes, let me take a breath. Okay, this isn't a healthy interaction, like kind of to yourself, like, I need safety, you know, and then it's almost like you're in survival mode.
Yes.
But it's with practice, you can kind of learn how to not really need your ego to be present, and kind of let that person think what they need to, so that you can feel safe and loved. And I think that's a practice that you can do for yourself. It's a self-love, self-compassion, you know, being very in tune with what you're needing and honoring that. It's not selfish, it's very loving. And
Yes.
you know, no one should, I think, I don't like saying should, but you know, if someone's if someone's being disrespectful, if the interaction's unhealthy, it's probably not a good place to be in that moment. So you know, I think it's for me anyway, I think it's better to be safe than to prove someone right, to prove that someone's wrong about who I am, and show that they're wrong about me, and you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm also thinking about the idea of like tolerance. What are you able to tolerate? And that says stuff about you, because like, I mean, I had my series of unhealthy relationships. I'm gonna just admit that right now. Yeah. And I realized through my like learnings about myself, like, why did I tolerate a lot of the fights I went through and the behaviors that I endured? Why did I tolerate it? And it was normal, because that is part of my upbringing, that I was exposed to that unhealthy relationship. It all stems down from your primary attachment to your caregiver. It's like what you learn as a child is how you look for things as an adult in your relationships. I've actually done so much research on who's more prone to unhealthy relationships, and who's prone, like, how do you, and the thing is, earned attachment is the thing. You could snap out of it with the proper help, and that's the good news, and care, and it just takes a lot of inner work and compassion, and soon when you do heal, you realize that I can't tolerate the things I used to tolerate anymore.
Yeah, and you don't put yourself in situations like that anymore. You learn to kind of recognize earlier on, okay, I know how this is gonna go.
Yes, yes. Oh, I love it. I'm so happy happy that we're having this conversation. By the amount of feedback that we're here getting, the thumbs up and the hearts as we're live streaming, I definitely feel like this resonates with a lot of people. I do know that this community, the How to Woman community, is very conscious and aware, not only mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually, but I do know that even if people are into energy work or spirituality just alone, I know that psychology just makes so much sense, and I know that it is so helpful to, there's so many aspects, you know, like with upbringings and even at the cognitive level with like chemistry and wiring and genes, and I mean we can really go on and on how why people act a certain way, why do they react and respond and behave and think, and you know, all of that. So it's really amazing, this conversation that we're having. I'm really, really, really grateful. I want to actually open up a discussion here with individuals that feel compelled to actually maybe have a question, want to add on. So if you feel compelled to share either feedback or you want to ask a question in regards to what we've been talking about, want a little bit more elaboration or clarity, please, I don't want it to end. please drop it here in the comments. Thank you for the compliment. We definitely received that. I definitely know that I can keep on geeking out on all of this because
talk about this for hours.
I'm just so passionate about it, because all of these things that we're talking about implementing, you know, I listened to Tony Robbins. He's one of my favorite, like, inspirational, motivational mentors out there. And he has mentioned that most of the time we're taught that knowledge is power, right? And to a certain degree, I agree with that, right? It's better to have the knowledge than to remain ignorant and to remain in the dark. But the most powerful thing that we can do is actually apply. So the most powerful thing is actually applied knowledge, you know, and in this realm, in this scope of in the line of work that we're in, as far as being service, being of service to individuals, accepting clients, and helping people gain some insight of maybe the blind spots that they have, or maybe they want a little bit more clarity or modalities on how to like coping mechanisms. I feel like when you apply these things, then your life really evolves and transforms, and you finally get to elevate to the point of self-actualization, and you'll feel so much more fulfilled. You won't have to externally look for validation or for approval, or go to a substance to numb you out, or to redirect you somewhere else in a different headspace. So it's actually really important that we're having this discussion right now. And I know that it's kind of like a whole different spin, because usually I have a lot of energetic and spiritual type of individuals who come in and talk about knowledge. But someone mentioned, touch on the impact of emotional invalidation on self-esteem. The impact of emotional invalidation on self-esteem. So do you ladies have any type of insight on that, or maybe like I like to call a download, something that just came to mind that you would like to share about that, whether it's a personal experience or a professional tip that you can give?
Yeah, I can give a personal example.
Sure.
As I said in the beginning, I was pursuing medical school for a while. My dad was very happy about that, and now I'm, now I'm in almost graduating, getting my master's in clinical psychology, and I've been hearing a lot, from him and from some other people, kind of like, oh, you're just a MFT, or like, oh, like what my work is, especially with like between MFTs and PsyDs, or like doctoral students sometimes. I mean, I only noticed this recently. I was definitely not aware of it until recently. Like there's this experience of like, oh, like, what do you know? You're just, XYZ. And I don't know. If I had been in medical school and someone said that to me, I would have taken it really personal. But I think when someone's trying to, I don't think they're intentionally trying to invalidate you. I think they're just trying to validate themselves. So I kind of just, I don't take it in because I think because I really like what I do, and I'm like, I don't care if what I do is, you know,
Yeah.
just X, Y, and Z. I'm happy in it. So, but again, that takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of emotional work, and no one's perfect. We're gonna obviously have slip ups, but I think that's especially when to apply this knowledge is in moments where you feel triggered, like, oh, they're not validating me. It's like, so validate yourself. Be like, you know what? I mean, I always put my hand over my heart. You know, I like to feel the energy of my heart.
Mm-hmm.
But everyone has their own style, of course, and just kind of telling myself, you know what, you're doing good, keep going, and being my own empowerment coach or whatever I'm needing, being my own
Yes.
guidance.
And it reminds
Yes.
me of a quote. Confidence is not they're gonna like me. Confidence is I'll be fine if they don't. And I really value that quote because it's the same thing as like self-esteem. Like self-esteem is you'll be fine if you don't because you're uplifting yourself. And as long as you have that self-love, which is a learned phenomenon, and it's this ongoing forever relationship with yourself, as long as your life continues, you're forever having this relationship with yourself. And it's all about just empowering that self-love and, you know, like knowing how to resist other people's. I want to say something else, but I forgot.
Well, I would like to add to that because to me it's relevant too. I mean, throughout life, I think all of us can relate. We've always had, especially if you were raised by parental figures, um, usually you have your parental figures trying to steer you a certain way based upon how they were steered, right? Based upon how they were guided, based upon the tools, the techniques, the resources that they were given, and they're just trying to do the best that they possibly can and approach you in order to try to mold you to be to have optimal survival as a human being.
Right.
But
right.
with that being said, right, first you have to recognize that that's what's happening. And I feel like whenever there is that instance where you feel invalidated by specifically like your parents, usually I feel like on their end, it's them actually feeling like they're losing you. It's like I mentioned, like people have an identity of an identity like prototype of who you are and who they hold you accountable to be throughout the whole entire lifespan, right? So if they saw you coloring at a young age, they probably thought you're going to be an artist, but they probably pushed an agenda for you to be a doctor or a lawyer, right? And if you don't fit that prototype, they usually feel like they've lost someone. And that right there, if they have not yet discovered and become aware that they're pushing an agenda on you, or that they're reacting in a way that's unhealed, unhealthy. And if you don't realize that, then of course it's so much easier to take it personal. But the moment that you actually have that awareness and you're like, hey, my parents are only functioning from an outdated software or a software that they were given from their own parents or their own upbringing, then it's so much easier to detach yourself emotionally from what they're saying to you. But I definitely have to say that the impact emotionally of someone invalidating is real. It does feel real, but it feels less intense when you actually become aware that people are just functioning. They're all on their own timelines, as you ladies mentioned. They're all on their own timelines, functioning from their own upbringings. And when you focus on healing yourself, it's so much easier to just kind of let things just kind of slide and fly by you. And then that's when you can either bless them or give them that forgiveness that they need or that you need for yourself in order to be able to cope with them.
Exactly. And what you just said resonated so much because it's like, exactly, it's the impact, it's there, it can be there, but it's less when you realize, oh, okay, they're just, as you said, operating from an old software. It's an old paradigm, you know, that is no longer serving at least the reality we want to live in.
Right.
So, and I think once, at least for me, I don't I don't even make a comment. I don't need to prove anything. My ego is just out of the equation at that point, and it's just kind of letting them, okay, if that makes you feel good in that moment, I'm letting them have it. Like, okay, you know, with the, it doesn't do any, it doesn't ruin my experience to let them have their experience.
Right.
That,
Yes.
you know?
Yeah, and
Yes.
just having that awareness that everyone, including our parents, have their limits, and how do we accept people for who they are and for their limits, and how do we embody the notion of forgiveness, and through that we learn more self-love and compassion for us, for ourselves, and for the other, and hopefully that will be enough to fulfill and validate ourselves.
So amazing. I love these discussions that we're having, and also for the individual who dropped that comment and wanted to elaborate more on that. Thank you so much. I do believe that when we speak up, it is such a sign of strength, because you never know who else has the same thought in their mind, who hasn't given themselves permission yet to ask the question, or to just say like, hey, I need a little bit more clarity on this, or how do you feel about this? So thank you so much for the person who asked that. I'm gonna say one more before we jump off this live, but if anybody else has a question or some insight that they want more, a little bit more clarification, more feedback, here is the perfect moment. You have three individuals that love to totally geek out and submerge and talk and have a hold space for improvement, right? It's all about improving ourselves in order for us to actually have an amazing, fulfilled life, and have the tools, the resources, to have to be able to cope with things, or to be able to conquer, to able to coexist with other individuals, or to even co-create with other people. So these conversations are actually really important. So for whoever has a question, there is no such thing as a silly question. At least in my book, I just think it's silly not to ask the question, because you just never know who else you're going to help out. But in the meantime, if you ladies have some of your final thoughts on what we talked about, or what you want to elaborate a little bit more, or maybe something that you have to offer that you would like to encourage people, here is the time for you to touch base on that.
Well, first, thank you so much for having us. And yeah, totally. It's so fun to connect and to geek out with people that are just as passionate about the subject as we are. And
I know, I'm loving this conversation. I feel like such warm energy, and I'm like, yes, I want this to keep going.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess one, if I can say one last thing, it would be the idea of emotions, and just know that emotions serve a purpose, and emotions purpose is for decision making. And I studied economics in college and psychology, so I was obsessed with the concept of emotions and decision making. And I realized that's prevalent in just how humans are. They're angry, they make decisions. They're sad, they make like we all make decisions based on the emotions we feel. So it's so important to understand your emotions and know that negative emotions are often, all emotions are often secondary emotions to either fear or love. And with that understanding, how can you move forward? But it takes time to learn these concepts. It really does.
Yeah, and it takes time to apply it too.
Yes.
It's not, you know, I think also part of self-compassion is cutting yourself slack, and we're gonna have slip-ups, and that's just part of being human. And you know, I wanted to add that when it comes to emotions, for me, it's not necessarily about avoiding, don't avoid the emotion. Allow to have to be meditation. It's just like up right now without the story, that's been so ingrained in us, you know, like, oh, when I feel this way, it means I'm bad. You know, for example, it's like, well, what happens if you don't have the story and you just sit with it? What comes up for you? And where everyone is the expert in their own life. You know, we have tools as therapists, you know, or as coaches, or as, you know, anyone who educates themselves with tools and can offer it to someone else. But we're all the experts in our own life. And when we just allow for the emotions to come, and we spend that that time in that stillness with that feeling, with that emotion, our body, our mind will come up with what we're needing and how to take care of ourselves. We have amazing internal guidance that we can all tap into. That I've been tapped into it since I was younger. So I know what it's like to be tapped into it and then to be disconnected from it. And you know, there's it's, again, just to echo what we've been saying, you know, it takes time to learn, and it takes time to apply, and self-compassion, you know, tolerance for yourself. And just the last thing I want to say is what has helped me personally in the past is to be like, all right, where am I operating from? Is this coming from fear? Am I making this decision because I'm like fearful about something, or am I 100% pure intention? Is it like I'm 100% in and I feel really drawn to it? Sometimes it's helpful to break it down into 2 or 3, you know, ego, fear, or love. Where am I operating from? And I personally want to operate from love. So
yes. With that being said, how can we recognize the ego? How do we know when the ego is present? How do we know when we are, yeah, how is it, what's one of the good signs that you can quickly observe within yourself that the ego is present and that's where you're functioning from? What would you say?
when you want to reflexively say something, I guess that would be the simplest way for me to say it. You want to just be like, no, that's not true. I'm this.
The defensiveness.
Otherwise known as defensive.
Yeah, I love it. We're going to leave it at that just because Instagram usually has the whole time limit of under an hour. So, but this has been really, really amazing, very insightful. Thank you, ladies, for showing up. Thank you so much for everybody who has shown up in this live stream. Thank you for everybody who is now watching the replay, because these are really insightful tools, resources, experiences, stories that I know for sure, because my process has been 10 years. So for the last 10 years, I've been really in and out of the process, and now I've come to understand that it's going to be a lifelong thing, because my thoughts are always shifting, paradigms are always shifting. There's so many things that I have to learn on how to adapt, how to assert myself. There's new people coming into my life, so that's the whole another dynamic, you know. So I definitely have come to the point and realization that this is a lifelong process, but when you have the help, the support, the guidance from other people to, as you mentioned, to hold a container for you, right, to hold space, then it's you can really evolve with confidence and knowing that you're safe and secured, and that the people who are holding that container for you have the best interest, because if they're able to hold it for you, they definitely have the best interest for you to actually elevate, ascend, self-actualize, whatever term that you prefer to use. And it's just a beautiful thing. So I want to lastly say that my door always remains open. My door is through the DMs. So if any of you have questions, want a little bit more insight, my DMs always remain open in order for you to slide on in into my office hours, I suppose, and ask me whatever, or give me insight or feedback or questions, you know, in order for us to help you, in order for us to help you out with your process and your journey, you know. So is there any way that anybody who is based in Southern California, any way that they can, let's say they like your teaching technique, or they want to know more about the resources that you have available, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
They can DM us.
Yeah, DM us for
Email,
now.
yeah, DM is best.
can email us. We have our email on Instagram. So yeah, we're also are open
yes.
too. We like that.
Office hours. I love that term.
Yeah.
Gonna use
My
that.
office hours tend to be 24/7 as far as like you chiming in, but I'll probably answer you within the 24.
Yes. Yes.
This has been so wonderful. Thank you so much, ladies. I do wish to continue this conversation and elaborate more on it, and hopefully in the near future. And if you all felt compelled, if you're watching the replay, if you feel, or you're watching the live right now and you feel compelled to share this, please allow us to share the knowledge by sharing this link, sharing this live through your DM to somebody that you know will benefit, or maybe just say like, hey, this was a really great conversation, you need to chime in, you know, or maybe someone who loves psychology and they want more of individuals who are like-minded and want to kind of toss those ideas. Please share the content, and I love you all and appreciate you. Thank you so much, ladies. Once again, it's always hard to let go of these lives, especially when they're this juicy, but thank you so much.